welcome back to Stones That Speak. Today, I want to talk to you about an idea that's kind of been knocking around in my head for a few weeks. And it's weird from my personal perspective because this idea has been a convergence point for several other thinkers that I follow. It has come up several times. The first time being the video that Paul Vanderklay put out several weeks ago called The Strange Business of Seeing. I'm actually not going to play any of that video in this one. I thought about it, but the part that I really was interested in the video was already Paul Vanderklay playing a clip of an audiobook, and I thought, am I going to play myself watching Paul listening to an audiobook? I figured that was probably a little bit too much. But the gist of the story from this audiobook is about these two boys who are pretty severely mentally disabled, and yet they have this interesting ability. They are calendar calculators. If you've never heard of this kind of thing, it's not super uncommon. It's the kind of idea that gets around for some reason. People with severe autism tend, like, you just, every once in a while it'll pop up as someone who has this kind of mental disability will also have the ability to tell you what day January the 3rd is going to be in 3042, the year, right? 1,000 years in the future, just off the top of their head. They just know it. They're not doing a calculation, though. And that is the very vital important part of this, is that these people who are telling you this, at least in the context of the story that Paul mentioned in his video, I'll have a link to it in the description. He's got the audiobook for The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. He has the reading from that of these two boys who are both calendar calculators, and yet they are not mathematically literate. They don't know how to do anything other than maybe some very basic addition. They can sort of muddle their way through for like small numbers, adding them together. They get that. Anything bigger than that, they don't get it. It doesn't work for them in like a classroom setting. But when you ask them, hey, February 8th, 2092, well, they know that's a Tuesday. I don't know how to do this, so I didn't pick one ahead. That's probably wrong. But they could just tell you, and they could tell you what date Easter would fall on in a certain day. They also, as Oliver Sacks realizes in the course of the narrative, are able to calculate primes. Very large primes. Now, this is strange, because there isn't a method for calculating primes. There's no mathematical formula that spits out prime numbers all the time. It doesn't exist. At least not one that can spit out all of the prime numbers. There are well, I don't know about necessarily, but up until now, our knowledge is limited such that we can't just generate prime numbers. They have to be discovered. And yet, these two boys, who are severely mentally disabled, Oliver Sacks, the psychologist, observes them sitting, thinking about something together, right? They're on their own when he sees them, and they say numbers to each other. Seemingly random numbers, very large numbers, and they're enjoying this process of just batting back and forth these numbers. And Oliver Sacks realizes that they're coming up with prime numbers. Now, prime numbers that have been discovered already don't get super excited, NSA, although maybe there's a possibility of getting somewhere with this kind of person being able to come up with cool larger primes. They're very useful for code breaking, or for encoding things, if you aren't aware. Big primes, very important part of national security. Knowing certain numbers is not good for you if you want to keep your freedom. So these boys are coming up with these, and Oliver Sacks sort of sneaks into the conversation, cheats on a book full of primes, and starts like playing off of them, and they engage because there's something about this world of mathematics that they just get. They just see it. And this business of seeing, as the title of the video that I referenced references, it's way more complicated than we really give it credit for. And the thing that had me thinking about this before Paul came out with his video was I have been reading and memorizing the book of 1 John. And in 1 John chapter 3, there is a verse that says, "Whosoever sinneth hath not seen him," that is God, "neither known him." Now that verse just like hooked into my mind and said, now wait a minute. What does that mean? What does this mean for seeing? What does it mean to see God, and why is it that those who have sinned can't see him? Not even can't see him, necessarily haven't, right? Like, so the premise of the verse is, if you could see God, you wouldn't be able to sin. It just wouldn't be present for you. Like, it wouldn't be a possibility, because if you had seen him, if you had fully and totally seen God, sin would be impossible. Whosoever sinneth hath not seen him. Now, of course, there are other verses in the Bible that talk about that you can't see God, right? Like, for basically the same reason. You have sinned. If you did see God, you would get burnt up, because he's a consuming fire, right? But also, there's that same idea is still built into there. There's something about seeing that is transformative. All right, now, obviously, this is talking about the seeing of God, right? The highest possible thing. And so, we might need to bring it back down to earth a little bit. But I just couldn't get that out of my head, and I kept thinking, like, what do I got to do? How do I see God? And I kept thinking about other verses and other places in the Bible where seeing is talked about, right? Jesus says, "If you have seen me, you have seen the Father." Well, lots of people... Okay, so let's track with that, though, because lots of people saw Jesus with their eyes, with their regular human vision that we all seem to participate in all the time without thinking about it, and they didn't see the Father, right? And there's also this sense in Paul of the seeing is not complete in this age, that we don't, like, our aim in life is to be able to purify our vision so that we can see the Father more and more clearly, but we still don't see him face to face in this life. That the glass is dark. We're cleaning it. We're like, you want to get as much of the gunk off of it as possible, and the more gunk you have on there, the less you can see. But you never completely get to the clear, perfect vision of God in this life, if I'm understanding what Paul's talking about here. But there's other ideas of this type of sight in the Bible, right? That there's actually more than one way to see, and it's not broken up in the scriptures when the scripture's talking about seeing. And so then I started thinking about, let's go to Numbers chapter 22. All right, this is the story of Balaam and his ass. All right, famous story of the talking donkey in the Bible. And we're going to skip over a bunch and just start here in verse 21. It says, "And Balaam rose up in the morning and saddled his ass and went with the princes of Moab." To make very complicated stuff a lot more simple, he's not supposed to do this. It's not obvious in the narrative up until this point, but it becomes clear as we read, he's not supposed to be doing this. He's going with the wrong motive or the wrong attitude or the wrong intent or whatever. "And God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the way for an adversary against him. Now he was riding upon his ass, and his 2 servants were with him. And the ass saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and the ass turned aside out of the way and went into the field. This is a great story. And Balaam smote the ass to turn her into the way. But the angel of the Lord stood in the path of the vineyards, a wall being on this side and a wall on that side. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she thrust herself under the wall, and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall, and he smote her again. And the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place, and there was no way to turn, neither to the right or to the left. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she fell down under Balaam. And Balaam's anger was kindled, and he smote the ass with a staff. Now here's the first opening in this story, and this is good. And the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and she said unto Balaam, What have I done unto thee, that thou hast smitten me these 3 times? Presented without comment. Apparently, animals can talk. God just doesn't let them. And Balaam said unto the ass, Because thou hast mocked me, I would there were a sword in my hand, for now would I kill thee. And the ass said unto Balaam, Am I not thine ass, upon the which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine, unto this day? Was I ever wont to do such unto thee? And he said, Nay. Right? Balaam getting a scolding from his donkey, alright? Pretty classic stuff. Now, here's the part we wanted to get to, because in verse 31 it says, Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand. Now, it's really evident from the story. Balaam is not having a problem seeing normal things that people see. Right? He gets out his saddle, he puts it on the back of the donkey, like, he's not tripping over himself, he's not asking his servants to lead him because he is unable to see anything, but there's a second level of his sight that is not accessible to him, in the same way that the level of speech is not accessible to the donkey normally until God gives it to her. Alright? So, Balaam then, once he's argued with his donkey, God opens his mouth and his eyes, and he's able to see, oh, well, there was an angel there. There was an angel there the whole time. You've been seeing that this whole time? Yeah, I've been seeing that the whole time. What are you talking about, Balaam? Alright. Obvious other passage is in the book of Kings, 2 Kings, chapter 6. And the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, and behold, a host compassed the city round about with horses and chariots, right? People come to get Elijah. King's mad at him, alright, because he's been prophesying to the king of Israel where his troops are. He thinks that he's a spy or something. He's like, I'm going to go take this prophet guy out, alright? Which, perfectly reasonable thing to do, right? You don't want people telling other people your troop movements, even if it is through supernatural psychic means, however it's working for Elijah. Through the power of God, ultimately. And his servant said unto him, this Elijah, Alas, or Elisha, I'm sorry, this is Elisha. Alas, my master, how shall we do? Right, which is the kind of flowery language for like, oh crap, we're screwed! What are we gonna do? Right? And he answered, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elijah prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see. Now again, this guy's not having problems seeing in the traditional way that we would understand it. If he was here today, he could watch this YouTube video, no problem. This is not the issue. And yet, there is something about the eyes that is still closed, because the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. Right? And then, just as a topper, Elijah makes all the people in the army, the other army, the human army, blind. And so we have this whole dichotomy of seeing and blindness. And that carries forward. Most notably, in the book of John, there is much discussion about seeing and light, and God is light. And as I mentioned, I've been working on memorizing the book of 1 John, which is sort of a compact like squished together version of everything that's in the Gospel of John about God being light and how to participate in that light and what that means. It's an incredibly dense, difficult to understand in some senses, because John makes incredibly strong statements. I mean, like I said, the one I've quoted at the beginning, whosoever sinneth hath not seen him, neither known him. That one's strong enough, but whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin, right? If you're taking that as like, well, you're born again or whatever. I'm born of God, right? Which is what hopefully a Christian would say. Have you committed a sin recently? Well, yeah, maybe one or two. You're not born of God. John said so. And so it seems like John's making a distinction here that there is within a person, because we can extrapolate this out from the rest of the Bible, within a single person, there is a nature that is born of God, and there is a nature that is not born of God. And the nature that is born of God, ostensibly, if we link it up with the other verse, can see God, and that is the nature that does not sin. I'm using the word nature here because it's at hand. If you don't like that exact way of phrasing it, you might have something better, but there's sort of pieces of you. Some of you is not holy. Hopefully a little bit of you is. And that is purified by the work of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. And so these are things that are ultimately the work of God, that he makes it so that you can see him. But it's not an all or nothing. It's not like, at least for most people, that you just walked around like, well, I'm sinless now. I'm born of God, so I'm good. Right? Like it. No, you got to purify yourself. Whosoever purifies himself, or whosoever hath this hope in him purifieth himself, even as pure he is pure, as John says in another place. Right? That's all part of this. And John, even in other places in the chapter, clearly states that, like, we sin. If we say we don't sin, we're liars, and we need to confess it, and our sins are forgiven. So these are all, like, if you take any one of these things as like the concrete, like, oh, well, born of God can't commit sin. Okay, but you got to understand which part of you is born of God. But there's this seeing part, this vision that needs to be purified, and I've been meditating on this, and then, wouldn't you know it, but last Sunday, the pastor of our church that I go to preaches a message on the blind man who Jesus has to heal twice. If you're not familiar with that, we'll just go ahead and read it here. And this is interesting for a whole host of reasons. And I am reading this out of context, although not out of context, but I'm not going to read everything that precedes it. But I will make mention of it because it's important. So to start with, the passage says, "And he cometh to Bethsaida," that's Jesus, "and they bring a blind man unto him, and he besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand, and led him out of the town." Very important. "And when he had spit on his eyes, and put his hands upon him, he asked if he saw aught. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. After that he put his hands again upon his eyes, and made him look up, and he was restored, and saw every man clearly. And he sent him away to his house, saying, Neither go into the town, nor tell it any in the town." Now, I mentioned the context because it is super important, and I am just ripping this idea off completely from the sermon I watched last night, or Sunday, I apologize. So, here's this town, Bethsaida, and I forget the other area that's close by, but this is essentially, in the ministry of Jesus, this is his main stomping grounds. He is in Bethsaida a lot. He is around this area a lot, and the people there all know him. But what does the gospel say? It says that A prophet is not without honor save in his own country. This is where Jesus is from. This is where Jesus does all his work, and yet people there do not believe on him. They keep saying, we want more miracles, we want to see something else, we want to have a sign. Give us a sign, right? And he's just gotten through two of the greatest miracles in the gospel back to back. As far as like scale goes. There's the feeding of the 5,000. Right? 5,000 men, plus women and children, fed with 2 loaves, or 5 loaves and 2 fishes, I think. Correct me on my math if I'm wrong about that. Impressive, alright? And then John tells us that they hound Jesus down and they're like, give us more bread! And he's like, you guys are not getting it. This is not about the bread. I mean, you know, yes, I fed you. I'm there to provide for you, but think bigger. Think about the bread from heaven. Think about the manna. And they're like, yeah, we want some manna. But what does that taste like? You guys aren't getting it. All right? He has this argument with them. And then Mark says, and it's like right after this, there's like a little break. So he has the feeding of the 5,000. Mark gives him a little break to do something else. And then there's another miracle of the same exact kind. The feeding of the 4,000. They still don't get who he is. They're still doubting who this guy is. And so Jesus essentially says, look, you are all blind and deaf. Well did the prophet Isaiah speak of you. Seeing ye see not, and hearing ye hear not. Alright? There is something about their seeing that is not complete. There is another mode of seeing they're not getting. And this is the seeing that John is talking about in his first chapter and throughout when he says, God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that God is a photon. Okay? It means that God is illuminating. He illuminates himself. And the reason they can't see Jesus is because they don't have illumination. They don't have that other seeing activated so that they can perceive who Jesus is. They look at his miracles. Their eyeballs are functioning. They see thousands of people fed with like a lunchbox. And people healed all over the place and blind men made to see, which, by the way, is a major miracle that Jesus does. Because you have to think about their context here. Now, we would think of, if you're going to do a miracle, maybe healing a blind man would just be like, well, yeah, that would be on the list of miracles that I'd want to be able to do. You know, okay, so you've got maybe heal the sick, all right, the deaf, all right, we're going to make the lame to walk, the blind, they're going to be able to see. And, you know, maybe if you're like hyper powerful, like maybe you could raise a dead man, right? Dead people getting back to life, that would be, boy, that'd be great. You could, that's a real miracle work. But Jesus is the first person in the Bible to heal blindness, right? Curing dead people? Well, I was about to say no big deal, but like Elisha and Elijah do it on the regular. Maybe not on the regular, but they like it's on the record, right? Elisha's bones bring a guy back to life at one point, right? So this idea of bringing people back to life, that's one thing, but nobody in the scriptures before Jesus gets healed of blindness. God does not do that miracle for anybody until Jesus shows up. And when he shows up, it's notable. They say, nobody's ever been healed of blindness before. That's crazy talk. Right? Because you can imagine, I mean, again, think about it from a modern materialist point of view even. Let's say that you've been blind your entire life. And let's say that I have the medical power to make your eyes function. You're still not going to be able to see. Right? Because seeing is a whole, like, eyeball, brain, everything working together kind of thing. If you've never experienced any kind of light, if I turn your eyes on, it may come to you eventually. But your first experiences of seeing are going to be chaotic. you're not going to have any idea of like, what does it mean to focus my eyes? I have never used that muscle before. What would it mean for there to be objects, and like your brain figuring out how to resolve all of that into like things that are not just a visual mass of noise? That's an incredibly cerebral thing, right? They didn't know that back then. We know that now. Makes those miracles even more impressive, because Jesus just does it. But in the case of this blind man, he has to do it twice. Now, I'm actually going to contradict. If somebody goes and looks up the message that my pastor preached on this, I will go ahead and put the link in the description to the live stream of our service. But I'm contradicting him, and I mean this in all, hopefully, honor and submissiveness. I think I take a little bit of a different tack to him. I do think that Jesus is condemning this region of Capernaum and Bethsaida, where he's done all these miracles and people cannot see him with this miracle. I don't think it's like he didn't have the juice, all right? The blind man, it's not coming to him with not enough faith, all right? Jesus not super tired or like doubting, whether he's going to be able to like do many more miracles. He's not like, the virtue is not running low, okay? This is not what's going on. Jesus can heal as many people as he wants to, but he never heals for no reason. And in this case, it's always more than just compassion. He's showing who he is, and he's showing the disciples here that there is more than one kind of sight. He spits in this man's eyes. He gives them the water from heaven, to rip off Jonathan Peugeot, right? The lowest form of the water from heaven is still salvific when it comes from Jesus. And the blind man sees this vision of men like trees walking. And then Jesus spits in his eyes again, and he sees clearly, like a person would normally see. And I think that what the message that Jesus is giving here is that there is more than one kind of sight. And the men of Bethsaida and the men of Capernaum, they can see with their eyes in the normal human way. But they don't see who I am. They aren't conformed to my image. And the reason they're not, the Bible makes this very clear. When you are trapped in your sin, you cannot see God. They could see a dude walking around, all right? They could see the body of Jesus, but they couldn't comprehend. They could not see that he was God. And this other kind of seeing is dependent on your relationship with God, on your level of holiness, on how much righteousness you have given to you from God, that you are able to see him. Because what does it say? The light shined in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Right? And the end of Revelation is about this too, right? At the end of Revelation, like everything gets set right, everything is perfect, the high places are made low, the low places are made high. The New Jerusalem comes down from heaven, and what does it say? There's no need of the Son, for the Lamb and the Father are the light thereof. Now what does that mean? That means that this illumination of righteousness that is possible through righteousness and also brings about righteousness, that is fully fulfilled in the final aspect of the world that God has intended to bring about. That those who enter into the kingdom will have this vision perfectly. Not in the limited way we can have it now, not in the constrained way that we can see God darkly through a glass because our sins are still fogging it up and dirtying it up and causing us to not be able to see clearly, but in the complete and full and perfect way of God's presence, that he will purge all of those imperfections out ultimately and make himself known perfectly. And that's why you have this not contradiction exactly, but the idea in Isaiah, the seraphims proclaim, the whole earth is full of God's glory. Right? That means everything, all right? I got a screwdriver here. According to the scriptures, Holy Scriptures, this is full of God's glory. You know what? I don't see it. Maybe if I studied it for years, if I really delved into the intricacies of this screwdriver, maybe I would start to see a hint of the glory of God. But He is in it. And in all things, right? Phone, yo-yo, right? The glory of God is in all of that and all around you. But what does the scriptures also say in Habakkuk and several other places? The future, the ultimate goal of creation is that not only is the earth going to be filled with His glory, but Habakkuk says, the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. That light that comes down that John is talking about from the Son and from the Father, that light shows how God shines through all of these things. And that's why Jesus starts by giving this man otherworldly vision. He says, listen, the men who can't see me, who don't understand who I am, who do not know that I am God, their problem is that they don't have vision from me. They have this second vision, right? He spits in his eyes again, and now he sees like other men see. But they do not have the vision that Christ gives, the first vision that God gave to man. Before He gave the vision of light as a thing that we just comprehend and see with our eyes, He had another light. He had a fuller light. And He wanted us to have that. But we've turned away from Him, and we've fallen from it. And I've been meditating on this a lot, and I've been thinking about this seeing. And it's been interesting to me how it's kept coming up over the last couple of weeks. I don't know if I fully grasp it. I know there's talk in the sort of Eastern traditions about the idea of the Nous, right? This idea that, again, when you say, "Oh, I see what you're talking about," that there is a real sense within the human person that is that sight, that is a mental or a spiritual sight that opens up the truth of God to men. And so, because our sight, our spiritual sight is darkened or even completely blinded, we cannot see who God is until He opens our eyes. I think I've said everything that I understand to say about this topic. It's something that I've been really thinking about, and I thought it might be valuable to somebody else. I hope that it is. I hope it's not a waste of your time. If you have further thoughts about this seeing, this idea of the light and God revealing Himself, and that seeing ultimately, and I think even in our human realm, that there is something about seeing that is conforming yourself to the thing that is seen. To look at something is to have some grasp of it, some understanding of it. Right? To look at a face is to know what a face is. A person who, like I said, who's been healed from their blindness in a physical sense from their eyes, but not mentally, where they couldn't comprehend things, they would look at a face and not see a face, because their brain wouldn't create that. They wouldn't use the visual data they had to make that image. You have to be conformed to the thing to be able to see it. You have to have a model of it within your mind. And that's why we can't see God unless we're conformed to His image and the image of His Son. That's why when Jesus said, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father," there were those who had seen Him but could not see the Father, because they hadn't really seen. They weren't conformed. They weren't taking part in his being. like they needed to. I hope that's helpful. More than that, I hope that all of us are able to conform ourselves to God and to purify our vision and to make ourselves pure as He is pure. I hope it's been a blessing. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll see you next time.